Hi, everybody. I'm David Peralta. I'm president of NCGR Boston. We're here today to hear a wonderful talk on age cycles by Georgia Stathis. And I'm just going to do a brief bio and then get out of the way. So since 1977, Georgia Stathis has been a professional astrologer in both natal and business astrology, a regular lecturer and contributor to articles and journals. She's the author of Business Astrology 101 and the recent Pushing Through Time, Synodic Cycles and Their Developing Phases, and also creator of Annual Star Cycles cheat sheet. The proceeds from today's lecture are going to Alexandria iBase project. The website is www.alexandriaibase.org. That's a uniquely designed, subject-driven database finding astrological materials, and for which Georgia has been the chair for 9 years. This is a global effort and service to our astrological community. And I'll just editorialize to say I'm personally thrilled that Georgia's here, and I think a lot of our attendees are as well. So with that, Georgia, thanks very much for joining us, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, David. Hi, everybody. It was so nice to see you all in the room today. And what we're talking about today are age cycles. And as I mentioned before the recording started, these are probably not things that are new to you, but I do have a cheat sheet. I love my little cheat sheets that you will see links to in the chat today. And for those who are not in the room today, if you don't get a copy of it, do write me at stathis.georgia@gmail.com, and I'll make sure I get that out to you in the next few days. So with that said, we're doing a thing about age cycles today, and this is what the cheat sheet looks like. And there's 2 pages to it. And I designed this about 3 years ago because, you know, when you get busy, as you all know, as professional astrologers, and you're doing a lot of charts, and this is when I was doing a lot of charts, you need to have information in front of you, even though your brain knows that after doing this 50 years, your brain still sometimes forgets. So this is what it looks like. But what we're going to do is really talk about it from a visual perspective today. So I'm going to go to the next slide. This is a real short and sweet. There are several iterations of this. This is not really what we're doing today, but this is another interesting thing to look at in terms of smaller age cycles. And this is actually an illustration from my book, Business Astrology 101, that from 0 to 7 years, we're kind of in the moon phase, because if you think about the moon, which is really a very deeply unconscious planet that reflects everything. You know, the first half of our lives is totally nonverbal unless you're just prattling a few words. And so whatever the environment the moon is that sort of becomes a part of your persona at a very young age. So the moon phase is happening from 0 to about 7 years of age. This is just a quick little sheet that really doesn't have a lot to do with what we're doing today, but it is fun to watch people at different ages to see how these might activate. I think from 7 to 15 is Mercury is the trickster era, from 7 to 15 years of age, when children realize what they can do and what they can't do. And, you know, it's the Oliver Twist area, it's the Peter Pans, it's mercurial, it's pueri turnus, where they're still children. But, you know, then the hormones start kicking in. They're kicking in a lot earlier now, somewhere around 12 or 13. And so when they move into their mid-teen years, from 15 to 24 years, I think this is very much a Venus era, because Venus is about desire and pleasure and enjoyment, you know, and making my first money. And what am I going to spend it on? It's not going to be putting it in a life savings. It's going to be putting it in a $5 cafe latte with lots of syrups, you know, at least that's the American way. Then from 24 to 34 years is kind of when you're starting to get a feeling of your life, you know, the sun years. Mars years, or the Mars period, might be 34 to 45 before we, you know, just as we move past that midlife, we'll be talking about that. Yes? Oh, okay. I thought I heard something. Then from 45 to 57, I think it's Jupiter. 57 to 70 is Saturn. And, you know, people are living a lot longer now if they maintain their health and if it's not a genetic thing. And so I really have seen a lot of examples as people are getting into the later years, especially the Pluto Leo people who, you know, still have that, you know, fire in their bellies. from 70 to 85 years is Uranian. It's the waking up cycle. And I am very optimistic. 85 to 99 could be a Neptune. And of course, 100 plus would be Pluto, because people do live to 100 and 105 years of age. So that's just kind of a mini overview. It really has nothing to do with the planetary cycles we're going to talk about today, but I like to refer to this sometimes when I'm working with a client, especially if they have children and teenagers, when I did a lot of work with children and teenagers. So we'll move to the next slide. So moving forward, or stuck. And this is something you all know, I know, but this was a basic tenet of my Pushing Through Time book, that because we'll be talking a lot today about, planets moving into squares or oppositions to their natal positions. And you all know this, but I do think a square is not really the same square, because when a planet, especially the outer planets, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, I use all of those, comes to an opening square to its original position, it's going to be a square, but it's an opening square. So what happens at that juncture, it's easier to confront and change things, to manage things, to organize things. After you've moved through, the crescent phase, which is the overcoming obstacles, and the red tape phase, the closing square or the last quarter square is still a square. When a transiting planet, or it could be a solar arc, or it could be a secondary progression, but we're just looking at a transiting planet right now, is in a last quarter position, squaring, this thing up here, which is the original point, it still has a ways to go, which means it can't really go back at that juncture, because it's already traveled 3/4 of the way around, and you're not going to turn around at that point. But I found that the closing square of aspects, transiting planets to natal positions, are very, very difficult. I call it the lost phase, because you're not really clear at that juncture about, I really can't go back, but I'm not really sure what I see ahead. And so what we start to do at this phase, in these last quarter phases, the disseminating, the last quarter, especially the balsamic, which is more of an incubation phase, is we start moving less from our brain or our thinking way into an intuitive thinking way, with more, and I hope experiencing a sense of surrender, which I think we'll talk about it, especially in the next few slides when we talk about Saturn, because there has to be a kind of surrender at a certain level whenever you're moving in a last quarter phase or these closing phases with the planets. Okay, so of course, Saturn molds us. And Saturn, of course, to its own position is on 7-year cycles, the famous 7-year itch. And, I mentioned this briefly a moment ago, the first quarter phase to natal Saturn, which happens, of course, at 7, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, is when, you start to put some structure to your life, or you start to manage things. And of course, the fourth quarter, or the last quarter phase to natal Saturn, can be more difficult. And I will share this, if maybe you didn't hear the Instagram interview yesterday or not, but I always love it when you're preparing for a workshop and suddenly you hear something on the news that's completely not related to astrology, but works for your workshop. So yesterday I was coming back from my hike, and they had a thing on NPR, it was child therapists or child researchers, and it was a tail end, and they were talking about how before children are 7 years old and they play on the playground, they have, they're very flexible, and, they're playful, and okay, we're going to change our minds, we're going to do this, and now we're going to go with these people. It's very free. But what she was saying is she noticed when they hit 2nd grade, which is, of course, the first Saturn square Saturn, it's 7 years and 8 years of age, that they see children suddenly making rules on the playground. Well, this is the rules of the game, and everybody follows the rules, which is Saturn. And if no one follows the rules, they can't play in the game. And if there is a confrontation about the rules, it becomes like a court. And they do things like paper, stone, scissors to make the decision. And I thought that was hysterical, because that's what Saturn square Saturn is at the 7th and 8th year. So I just, this is how we see it in our lives. But I thought that was a great little thing that I saw yesterday. Now, the other thing about Saturn and Saturn cycles to itself, because, Saturn, if you look at Saturn, you can look at Saturn, you can actually see it. It's as far as our eye can see. Beyond that, we cannot see the field of planets. And of course, before people had telescopes and before they knew other planets were out there, they really believed this was the limits of the universe. So Saturn in many ways is the perception of what we think is real, or the perception of what really exists. And that's why when you have hard aspects of Saturn to Saturn, you challenge those predetermined thought forms, and you change them. But Saturn also does some great things. If we didn't have Saturn, we'd be a mess, I think, because it grounds us. It restricts us, which is interesting. It's an ST word, restricts us, Saturn. It clears us, it cleans things out. Saturn, hard aspects of Saturn to Saturn helps minimize our lives in some way. And, as we're going through any of these planets today, and this is something it took me 5 years to learn because nobody ever taught me. I not only look, when I look at a horoscope, to see where, Saturn is squaring its original position, but I always look to see the house that Saturn rules, because I always like to incorporate the house it rules with any of these hard aspects, especially. And I find that it just gives me, it's like Star Trek and, the three-dimensional chess. It gives you just a little bit more information by just looking around the page at what we don't always look at. Saturn will discriminate. It'll sort things out, which is another ST word. It organizes. It rids the extraneous, and it is not an easy cycle. Saturn's painful. It's not as painful as Pluto, but it's painful. And so because the planets activate at different ages, Saturn is probably the most important, as it really does lay a foundation down for us at a very early age. Because before the first Saturn return is what I call the maturation phase of one's life. And I really don't think people are total adults until Saturn gets back to the original position at which it was when they were born. And that doesn't mean that they're total adults at that point, but at least they've been through all the phases of Saturn to the natal position. Once a person moves past the Saturn return cycle, this is when the young adult phase begins to emerge. And so, but the first Saturn return will bring often responsibilities into one's life, upon which they can build a framework for their life, or the framework they've built is being challenged. And, many years ago when I was a much younger astrologer, your age mates were coming in and their, divorces, issues with relationships. The thing about Saturn cycles is you have more of a stick-to-itiveness to it to try to work things out. And that's important rather than just walking away from the pain of Saturn, because if you don't face the difficulty of this cycle, doesn't mean you'll stay there or you'll remain with that job or whatever the issue is, but at least you gave it your best shot. And I think one of the things about Saturn that I think is so very true is that Saturn's not necessarily a cruel god, but Saturn is a just god. And if you've done the work, Saturn will respect you for it and work with you, especially as you get older. And for those of people who have horoscopes that are angular Saturns or have a lot of planets squared or opposed by Saturn, or Capricorn rising people, or a lot of Capricorn, I find that, their lives really get better as they get older. It's like almost like Merlin, who grows backwards and gets younger, and I think that's very true, especially after the big 45-year, which we're going to talk about in a minute, Saturn opposition, is as you deal with the challenges of Saturn and confront the challenges of Saturn. And most importantly, and I think this is a very important piece, is to overcome the fear that is endemic as part of the Saturn framework. It's fear. It's the fear of, if this happens to me, this is going to happen, because that often is a fear that comes from, of course, an experience, but it's often a fear that derives from either, now they're doing a lot of work with trauma in families, and they're finding that trauma is stored in the DNA, or a highly angular Saturn in a horoscope would It could be a family that comes from a fear position. And so the person coming into this life, her or his or its, now we have to use all this gender fluid stuff, has to deal with the initial lesson of Saturn in their early years and look at, is this a real thing, Saturn? Is this a reality or is it not a reality? So moving beyond the perception of one's limitations, especially at the first Saturn return, is one of our greatest challenges. In earlier years, when we're having Saturn hits to Saturn, we're dealing more with fear issues or survival issues. But the challenge of Saturn is to move past the fear and into self-trust, which could be also called wisdom. Following are some of the things we do when Saturn is hitting us at an age cycle. We become steely. These are all the Saturn words. We become steely. We start sticking to something. We get structured. We get stern. We get stifled. We're doing the standard regulation things, like the kids at 7 setting up the rules. Sometimes we get stingy, like Scrooge. Interesting that Scrooge came out at, during the Christmas holidays, the Christmas Carol, and right at the time that we have winter solstice, which is 0 degrees of Capricorn, ruled by Saturn. We have stasis. Sometimes we feel stuck. We feel like stone, or we feel cold when we're having Saturn hits to our charts. We also have stamina, because it's tough. That's one thing about Saturn. It's pretty tough and it's pretty anchored. It's, it kind of looks like an anchor that's hooked into the earth. Or we strike out. We try, okay, we're going to strike out and think about what we're doing. So these are different things that act out at different ages, come out at different ages. Now, this is a graph I have from Business Astrology, and what it is, it's talking about the first quarter squares, the oppositions, and the last quarter squares. So what I've got it color coded, because I know a lot of people do better with color, right brain, rather than words or visuals. So I've color coded this. So the building squares of Saturn to the natal position are from 7 to 8 years of age. It's also from 36 to 37 years of age, which is also the nodal return, one of the nodal returns. The building square, the managing, organizing, building something, 65 to 66 years of age, which might be for a lot of people when you start to build a new life. You're thinking possibly of retirement, although I have to tell you something. When I taught the undergraduate program at Kepler for about 8 years, we did it, team taught. This was back in 2001 to 2002 to 2009 or 10. One of my buddies, Rob Hand and Bruce Schofield and Lee Lehman and Stephen, we were all teaching there. And several of them were working on their doctorates, and they were in their 60s at the time. And so I remember seeing that at the time thinking, wow, this is what, 20 years ago, 21 years ago. I was at that time in my early 50s. And I thought, wow, it's interesting. I saw it as interesting that they were at that age, rather than retiring, going for their masters or their doctorate. They had to have masters, to going for their doctorates or going for additional degrees, and also teaching at a university that was teaching structure astrologically. So, don't give it up. Sometimes people start new careers around 65 to 66 because they're going to live a lot longer. 95 to 97 years of age is another first quarter Saturn square. And 103 to 105 is the last one I have on the board here. Now, what about the opposition? My definition of an opposition, which is the easiest definition in the world, is if you took a rubber band and you were to stretch that rubber band as far as you could possibly stretch it, the thing is either going to break, or if you don't want it to break, you have to let something go. And a Saturn opposition to natal Saturn is exactly like that. You've come to a stretched point where there's too much on your plate. A lot of it may be self-judgment from childhood, especially in the first, we have the first Saturn opposition around 15 years of age. And then we have it again around, let's see, where am I going? 15 to 17, which is the lightning bolts here. We have it from 44 to 46, very crucial age. And we have it from 73 to 75. It's the first Saturn opposition from 15 to 17 is, I think, literally the teenager is challenging the parent, or the parent is challenging the teenager, or challenging society, or society is getting in there and giving its opinion versus the parent's opinion. And there's this kind of trying to separate from the rules, separate from the structure, but also having consequences for bad choices. And that's a Saturn opposition. Or maybe, you know, I think this is an age when if somebody, for example, a teenager has been, say, an athlete, you know, or say a piano player. They've been taking music since they were 7 years old, and they're really, really good at it. But they don't want to do it anymore. But the parents want them to keep doing it. And it's at that age, 15 to 17. I'm not doing this anymore because I have other things I'm more interested in. That's the first Saturn opposition. The second Saturn opposition between 44 and 46 is hard, really hard, because first of all, there's less energy. You've just come through the midlife, which we're going to talk about, the midlife outer planets being alive and well. And the issue that you've got 45 years behind you and you really don't know, you know, I think it's very funny. I mean, for those of you in the room who are in your early 40s thinking that life is over, it's not. I hear this a lot from 40 to 43-year-olds, like, oh, I'm really getting old. I just feel so old, you know? Well, you're not really getting old. Your skin, Saturn, is wanting to shed so that you can have a new skin, which is a better skin, actually, as you get older. So these are the big decisions made between 44 to 46 years of age. And then, of course, 73 to 75 years of age, maybe some health issues come in. Maybe this is a time, if you haven't dealt with health issues, that you really start to take care of your health and you do much more disciplined about your daily routine. Or maybe you don't really want to retire, but there's parts of your business or your work that you just don't want to do anymore. Maybe it has a lot to do with time, because Saturn is about time and how I use time and how I spend time. And the thing about time, something I'm very clear about at this juncture in my life, is that we cannot save it. We cannot bank it. We have to use it when it's in front of us. And that's kind of the reality that starts to really hit people, if not sooner, at the 73rd to the 75th year of the opposition, which is also when other things are going on, which we'll mention in a moment. Then we have, which I think is one of the difficult periods. I think these are the lost periods that I was talking about before. And that's the orange arrow, the 21 through 22. Transit Saturn is not at Saturn yet. It's got another 7 years to go. 51 to 52, which is also the Chiron return, we're going to talk about that a little bit later, is when Saturn is, you know, now you are starting to feel tired. For men and women, they both go through hormonal changes at this point. They don't have the same energy or the same ambition. This happens at this last quarter phase, 51 to 52. At 80 to 81 years of age is another last quarter phase to natal Saturn, which is exhausting. And I would say that it's very, very important at this particular last quarter square to Saturn that people, even sooner, if you're this age, that you have younger friends, that you have younger people in the community with whom you associate, as well as your friends that are age mates, because this is when you start to lose a lot of your very close friends. And, you know, I have to share this story. My father lived to be about 100 years old. And actually, if his kidneys hadn't given out, he would have lived a lot longer. But he told me when he was in his 70s and 75th year and 80th year, when a lot of his friends were passing, and I started to pay attention to this, always have younger friends. Not only because you're disloyal to your regular friends, but because you need younger friends. And the younger people give you new ideas. You know, it's like this is also a percolation. It's like percolating ideas for something that you might be wanting to do, especially as you get closer to the 84th or 85th year, where you wake up, you know, with the Uranus return, it giving you ideas. Like yesterday, I did Instagram. That was cool. I mean, I'd never done it before. I was terrified of it, but I did it. Now I know how to use it. And of course, 110 to 112, I don't know anything about it, but again, I'm optimistic. And then, of course, we have the returns. We have the first Saturn return from 28 through 30, which is marked by this Native American star. We have the second Saturn return. These are very different coming of age cycles. This one is just, gee, I have to be responsible in the world. The second one is, I did my work. I did my work. Do I really want to keep doing it? And then, of course, the last one is, what do I want to leave behind? But I think that actually starts a lot sooner. I think the legacy work, if you will, really begins at the Saturn opposition for people around 73 to 75. But the return on the legacy work around 88 through 90. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So now let's talk about more, it's always fun to talk about Jupiter because Saturn can be kind of heavy. You can feel the energy of all the heavy responsibility stuff. So Jupiter's a fascinating cycle because obviously it's fast. You know, we're going to have a lot of these returns in our lifetime. It returns every 12 years. We know that. It also keeps, because it's so quick, you know, it's running with other cycles. It conjoins more frequently with Neptune, more frequently with Uranus, so that you have more frequent. Some synodic cycles are much more frequent. But I think over time, I think Jupiter's expression changes and evolves over time. So, for example, the first Jupiter return is 12 years of age. And I know this because, you know, I remember when my son was, I have a daughter and a son. My daughter's like only 5'1", but my son is a big guy. And I remember I went to, I have to share this with you because I was dumb. I didn't know these things. I went to a lecture of a couple that wrote a book about raising a boy, which is still a book. It's Raising a Boy. It's blue cover. I don't remember their names. And I remember them telling me, you know, somewhere around the 12th year with boys, the hormone, the testosterone starts to just leap through their body. They start growing, their hands get bigger, but they're still little kids, right? So they're walking down the hall, tapping the wall, and they'll walk down the hall, you know, like just listening to music and tapping on the wall, but then maybe their tap is really heavy and it breaks the wall because they don't know how strong they are. And I think this is kind of the first Jupiter return. Boys and girls hormones start flying. Girls hormones start to fly. They're growing. They're not always comfortable in their bodies. They're sort of like, you know, 1-year-old puppies, if you will, or 2-year-old puppies that are still sort of gangly. But by the time you get to the second Jupiter return of 24 years of age, you've already been through a cycle of last quarter square to Saturn. So, you know, this is now when it's time to learn new things. I think the 20s, my personal opinion, the 20s, I think, is when you really learn a lot of new things. If you're open. If you're not open, that's unfortunate because it'll take you down many roads. You're more adventurous in your early 20s. You go on hikes, you go on trips. You know, you're working a lot, but you're still going out at night. There's a lot of energy at the 24th year. Then the third Jupiter return comes at the 36th year of age, which is a crucial turning point, I think, because it happens to be the same time as the second lunar nodal return. And I'll have a couple slides on that a little later, but I think this is what's the word I want to use? It's a pivot. I think this year, the third Jupiter return, the nodal return at 36 to 37 years of age, right before the midlife crisis, is a pivotal year to pinpoint with clients if they're coming in at this age or if they're older, you know, struggling with certain issues, especially professionally, looking at the 36th and 37th year because decisions were made at that time. Having a little bit of water. The fourth Jupiter return is at 48 years of age, and it comes right after the exhausting Saturn opposing Saturn, the solar arc, when the solar arcs are all at 45-degree distances from each other, and Jupiter is at a 45-degree distance, which is an opening semi-square, which I have to share this with you. You know, I don't remember definitions of aspects that well, but somewhere along the road, I'll remember a couple. And somebody, I don't know, maybe somebody, I don't know who said this, but they said the 45-degree aspect, which is what happens when you get all the solar arcs around the mid-40s to the natal positions, is if you were walking through the weeds, if it was a snake, it would have bit you. And I remember that always stuck with me, like, you know, you're walking along and things are going, but there's things that are hiding that you don't see coming, and then suddenly you have to pivot. And it's just a very interesting period, about 48 years of age, because you've just been through all the midlife stuff, and now you've got a Jupiter return, which tells me you've learned a few things. So there is a release at this age of something during this time. I don't know if it's a psychological release, if it's a physical release, if you move. But there's a big release around the 48th year, the fourth Jupiter return. And of course, the fifth Jupiter return, 12 times 5, is very important because it's just after the second Saturn return. You can take a deep breath. And of course, by solar arc, everything has moved, depending on what time of year you were born, about 60 degrees from their natal positions, which is a sextile, which another definition I remember about sextiles was it's a combination of one's ability and an opportunity. And I always love that definition. It's the combination of an opportunity along with one's ability, which of course, if you've done the work all along and you're having a second Saturn return, you're good at something. You're going to be good at something, even if it's building decks, even if it's building a budget sheet, even if it's doing a garden. This is when that's something that you've built at the third Saturn return. There's going to be some sort of a payoff in a good way where you can help others, you can teach them, whatever. So that's a little bit. Do we have a question? Because I think somebody's not muted. I'm hearing noises. Okay.
I've been catching them, Georgia, as they happen. Sometimes people unmute by mistake.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. It's good. No, it's pretty good. People are being great. So right now, before we do this, do we have any questions, any confusion? Am I going too fast? Sometimes I'm accused of going too fast.
There are no questions in the chat so far.
Okay. Oh, somebody said, I wish I knew this when I was 44. Yeah, well, we all wish we knew it. This is why we're doing this workshop today, so you can help others when they go through it, okay? So, Jupiter, I could go through thousands. I do an archetypal workshop for a weekend for Midwest School for Pam Gallagher. So there's a lot of things that we could do with Jupiter, but, Jupiter has a lot of different expressions. The standard thing is expansion, fortune, overindulgence, of course. But, I always ask myself, now, why is that? I've always asked myself, well, Jupiter is named after Zeus, the Greek version. And it's interesting, if you know the story of Jupiter or Zeus, who was as I used to tell my children, we're Greek, I used to say he was the big god, he was all over the place. But if you look at his stories, and these are just two of them, I'm not really clear if there's any others. There are other gods and goddesses that emerge out of Jupiter, which I think has a lot to do with the evolution of Jupiter, as it returns every 12 years. And I'm going to share them. And on the right, I have a couple illustrations. On the upper right, you'll see it's an old, it's a drawing, a Greek drawing. And it's a little hard to see it, but out of his head, out of Zeus's head, out of Jupiter's head, is coming Pallas Athena, who is fully armored. And it's very interesting because the way she's born, which really has a lot to do with Jupiter stories too, the way she's born is that her mother is Metis, M-E-T-I-S. She's the goddess of wisdom. Wisdom. Saturn is wisdom as you get older. Saturn and Jupiter were at odds with each other in the sky. And he devoured, I don't know why he devoured his wife or his partner, but he does. And as soon as he does that, he has a terrible, terrible headache. And out of his head comes Pallas Athena, fully armed, fully in warrior garb. And she becomes the goddess of wisdom, birthed out of the devouring of Metis into Jupiter. So it's an interesting mix. And so, we see Athena a lot in the court system. We see the picture of Athena, with the balancing scales, which is very much a Libra image. We see, the fairness of Athena. So that's kind of a Jupiter thing, the law as well. Now, the other story of Jupiter, Zeus, is that another story along the way is that he's deeply in love with Semele, who is a mortal. He's got a lot of mortal girlfriends, okay? And he's deeply, deeply in love with her. And he's dated her for a long time. Let's just put it that way. And he says to her, I love you so much. I'll promise you anything you want. Just anything you want, I'll give it to you. And he promised her. And so because he promised, he had to live up to the promise. And she says to him, I want to see you in full God glory. And, you know, when she says that, he has to honor it, but he knows she will die if he does that. What has happened in the meantime is she has become pregnant with their child, Dionysus, who's really Neptune. It's also Neptune. And so when she burns into flames, and he's about 7 months along, the baby, he puts the baby into his thigh, which is interesting because, you know, people with strong Jupiters have big thighs usually, or they are runners, the big thighs. He puts it into his thigh where the baby will stay until it's born. And that's the picture on the bottom where the baby Dionysus, who's really Neptune, is coming out of his thigh. And it's often referred to, the thigh is often referred to as the seat of wisdom. So, you know, this is why I say Jupiter has a lot of evolving cycles. So when younger, we're much more Falstaffian, much more, you know, Zeus, let's just go with all the women we possibly can be, or all the men we can possibly be, or all the jobs we can possibly be, or spend all the money that we make. We overdo when we're younger. We're doing very Zeusy, undeveloped Zeus, Jupiter things. But as we mature, we become these different parts, okay? We're maturing Jupiter cycles. We'll discover more of the inner world, our hidden gifts, while expanding our inner world. And so, you know, this is a thing, I would love to see somebody do some research on this. If I had a lot of time and nothing else to do, I would do more on this, but I don't. But I often just hear people saying, well, Jupiter is a 12-year cycle. Jupiter's good luck when it comes around. But, you know, you have to look at everything else that's going on in the horoscope. And you also have to look at the house Jupiter rules, which are Sag and Pisces, and watch where you're overdoing it if you're younger, and watch where you can expand and kind of pull other things in so you can expand more readily when you're more mature. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, why is that happening? Okay. Yeah, because the Jupiter return cycles are what I call the calculated risk cycles. They really are. As you every 12 years, you're doing some sort of calculated risk, especially if you work with your Mars. And here, I thought this was I thought this would be fun to look at. I have, you know, all the way to 108, all the 12-year cycles in this little grid. 12 years at 24 years, you're also in the last quarter square to Saturn. 36 years, you're in your nodal return. 48 years, we talked about this, just past the solar arc opposition to the Saturn opposition to Saturn, and the solar arc semi-square, 45 degrees. The Saturn return at 60. The quintile, another definition of the quintile, which I heard somewhere along the way, was it's an aspect of major evolutionary change. And I really love that. And in a moment, we'll return to that thought. At 84 years, we have the Uranus return to its position, 96 years for Jupiter, and then at 108 years. Now, what I did, if anybody likes numerology, and we're not going to go off on a tangent here with numerology, but it's, you know, kind of an interesting exercise. I added up these numbers here times 4, and this is, yeah, I added them up, and each one of these adds up to a number 3. 1 plus 2 is 3, 4 plus 8 is 3, 8 plus 4 plus 8 is 12, which is 3, 8 plus 4 is 12, which is 3, and a 3 is learning, studying, expanding. It's like the third house. That's how I look at it. At 24, you're 2 plus 4 is 6, 6 plus 0 is 6, 9 plus 6 is 15, which is a 6, and this is like the 6th house. Let's get our technique down. Let's get our systems down. Let's get organized in our databases. Let's get our house cleaned. Let's get our health cleaned. Let's take better care of ourselves. That's the 6s. And then in these other Jupiter returns, 36 adds up to a 9. The quintile, 7 plus 2 is a 9. 108 is a 9. What is the 9? The 9 is the only number in the numbers that will give itself up for the greater good. You can just take a whole, I work with numbers constantly. You can take a whole list of all kinds of complicated numbers, you know, 6 digits, 7 digits, add them all up, do a summary, add them and reduce them down to what a number is in numerology, And if you do it that way, you'll get the same answer as if you take all those numbers that are on the list and just cross out all the 9s and do the same thing, you'll get the same answer, because a 9 always gives itself up to the greater good. And this is what happens at 36, at 72, if you've developed wisdom at any level. So, and I wanted to share this with you because I just did a podcast for Weekly Weather for Astrology Hub, because I'm going to be teaching for them next year in the Inner Circle. And this is one of the slides that was on that podcast, but I wanted to share this because we just had Jupiter go direct on November 23rd at 28 degrees of Pisces. It will be in Pisces all the way through December 20th when it enters Aries. And even though it's finishing a 12-year cycle, it's also finishing up another cycle, because it's the end of the 12 sequences of the 12 years of Jupiter. And so what was interesting about this is when that thing went direct on November 23rd, it was at 28 degrees and 47 minutes. And it went direct very close to the fixed star called Scheat, S-C-H-E-A-T, which a lot of you are professionals and you know what we think about that in our circles, that it's not a nice word that I'm not going to use. It's not exactly the favorite fixed star of all, but good old wise Diana Rosenberg, when she was alive and she wrote her book on fixed stars, I was going to publish her book and it was just so big I couldn't do it. But we sat down and talked about this star at 29 degrees of Pisces. And she said, well, you know, it doesn't always mean the bad thing. She said, because where it is in the sky is it's in Pegasus, which is the horse that flies the heroes to heaven. And Pegasus is flying above Andromeda in the sky, who is the chained woman, where the sea monster is coming to eat her and where she will be rescued by Perseus. And so what Diana's take on this 29-degree fixed star of Scheat, where Jupiter will be over the next few weeks, it represents freedom from bondage. And I just wanted to share that with everybody because I'm seeing that in very subtle ways all over in the community, on the news, even though things seem very dark right now with Pluto finishing up in Capricorn. So I just wanted to share that with you as an alternative definition for Scheat, especially since it just happened in the last couple of weeks, and I'll move on. Okay, so the nodal return cycle, we have been talking about this, but I want to talk about this in terms of when you're working with clients. These are like what I call mini coming of age cycles for everyone. And they happen for about 18 months because the nodes are about an 18-month cycle. They happen around 19, at 38 years of age, at 57 years of age, 76, 95, 104. Now, this is an interesting, and of course they run with the eclipses, we know that. So, and before I mention the last point, I want to say something. Whenever I do see a client, I always look at their age first. That's how this whole thing started, because it'll tell me something. And after doing readings for too long a time, you see things. And so, you know, I used to get a lot of people in at 36 and 37, or even in their mid 40s. And I would ask them a question like, what was happening when you were about 19 years of age? What were some of the things that you really loved to do, that you really felt like, oh, I would have such a passion for? And I cannot tell you how many times they say, well, gee, you know, I really wanted to do photography, or I really wanted to do writing, or I really wanted to do whatever. And now they're, you know, having another nodal return, or they're past their midlife, and they're actually entertaining the same thing that they were entertaining as an idea at the 19th year. And I always try to do that with them because it validates the subjective experience that they're having. That, gee, I maybe should spend some time doing photography. Maybe I could carve out a day a week where I just go and I take pictures of the ocean or whatever, right? And that's our job as astrologers, is to validate the subjective experience that they're having. And by knowing these age cycles, these nodal returns are so important, lunar nodal returns, this is going to make a big difference. Now, the last point of this, Jim Valliere taught me this way back, I hate to say when, 1992. Jim Valliere was a brilliant astrologer, I think he's still around. He used to do the Valier graphic ephemeris. And he taught me this at a session that we had, in that if you look at a, because I work a lot with eclipses, obviously the lunar nodal returns run with the eclipses. But if somebody is born with the prenatal solar and lunar eclipses really far back before their birthday, you know, maybe you're born, like I'm born in March, they happen for me in November. That means that during the course of their lifetime, when they move to a secondary progression, if they live, you know, an average lifetime, they're going to have the prenatal eclipses activated. And so in the secondary progression, in a specific year, they're going to have an eclipse in the secondary progression. They'll have it, and then they'll have another one about 14 years later, which is like 2 weeks, 14 days. And that's a life-changing year when those things happen. And I remember Jim Valier, he was so smart. I think he was a Sag. I was a young astrologer. I thought, oh, that's interesting. And boy, have I found this to be true. I've even just very recently saw it in a corporation chart I was working with, and it was exactly on schedule. The day it happened, exactly a major thing happened. So it is an important thing to look at if you have a lot of time, nothing else to do, but I think it's worth mentioning. Okay, so once we get to the mid-years, the outer planets start to wake up. You know, my view about Uranus and Neptune and Pluto is they sort of lay around sleeping like sleeping giants in the horoscope until they start to get opposed, especially oppositions and squares, because they're slow. And depending, and this is important to know, because depending on, especially for the only Pluto first quarter square to Pluto, depending on when this person was born, that's going to happen only once in their lifetime. But depending on when they're born, it could happen in their late 30s. Or if you're born in 1913, it happened when you were 58 and 59 years of age, because Pluto has a very elliptical cycle. So first, let's explore Pluto, because he's the slowest, he's the most difficult, and Pluto's also where you dig for your real gold. So let's go there. So the Pluto square Pluto. My view is that Pluto is the planet of consciousness. And my view of Pluto is that it's black and white, it's no gray. So if you're going to work with Pluto, you're going to have to really be very black and white about how you deal with your life. You can't make deals with Pluto. He doesn't make deals, if you will. So the first quarter square of Pluto is the descent into the underworld, or into the unconscious. And and into the shadow, which is a psychological term. I'm not a therapist, but Pluto rules psychotherapists. To face the demons inside of, we all have demons. We all have the shadow inside of us. Some people will have the courage to look at it and some people will not. But this is what happens in the first Pluto square, the only Pluto square. Pluto square is its own position once in a lifetime only. But as I mentioned earlier, at different ages. 1913 people, it happened at 58 years of age. And in 1950, it happened around 40. The cycle is like hanging on a hook until you surrender that which you hold most dearly. So what you have is the sun dance, Native American sun dance, which was pretty gruesome, but you know, where they would, I think it was very much of a Pluto shamanic journey. And when I work with Pluto transits to my clients, I give them the story that, you know, Pluto is the god that wants you to look at things that are deeper inside of you. And if at this age, what he does is he comes along, I'm pretty straight with my clients. He comes along and he's hanging you on a meat hook in hell. Okay, that's kind of this picture. And if you're a strong Pluto type person, which a lot of people have angular Plutos, or they're Scorpios, or they have Pluto square the sun, you know who those people are. The first thing they're going to do on a Pluto square Pluto is they're going to try to negotiate a deal to get off the hook. But the thing about Pluto, he doesn't take any prisoners and he wants you to make a decision, okay? So he ignores you and you're hanging on the hook and you're hanging on the hook. It's a good 22-month cycle, the Pluto square Pluto. And you finally get to the point, because he's ignoring you, and you finally say, look, whatever you want, please just, I'll give you anything you want, just let me off this hook. At which point he turns around and he looks at you and he says, okay, here's the deal. You sacrifice on my altar the thing you most believe you cannot live without, and I'm going to give you back your life. Now, for some people, it's an addiction. For some people, it's a relationship. For some people, it's, money. For some, whatever it is, everybody has something. For the fear of being vulnerable, the fear of being discovered, that you are very scared. I mean, it's very simple, but it's very real. And so, because life is so hard on the meat hook, you surrender. And when you do that, and this is the thing about when Pluto square Pluto is finishing near the end of it, because Pluto goes back and forth 2 degrees a year, there's this momentary limbo that you're in where nothing's happened. And then you're really in a place of surrender. I mean, I've given it all up. I really don't see anything happening. I'm invisible. Pluto is very invisible. At which point Pluto says, okay, here's a gift. And when you go back to life, you open this gift. And when you go back to the new life, you open the gift, and in it is your real treasure, your real gold. And it is absolutely nothing that you surrendered on his altar. And that's the story I tell my Pluto square Pluto clients. And I also share the story when they have heavy Pluto hits to especially major planets in their chart. So, the one thing I wanted to mention here, and we all know this, but in our lifetimes, in the last 30 or 40 years, we've had multiple transformations, all of us, regardless of who we are, because where Scorpio is in our chart, wherever Scorpio is in the chart, or where even Pluto is in the chart natally, there have been multiple transformations. And why is that? That's because, and I mentioned this a little earlier, the orbit of Pluto is extremely elliptical, spending about 30 years in the sign of Taurus and only 12 years in its opposite sign of Scorpio from 1984 to 1995, when, by the way, all the kids were wearing black, and that was goth, and that was the black nails. That was during the Pluto and Scorpio period. So this also means that those born in the mid-century of the mid-20th century will experience at least 7 or 8 ingresses of Pluto into the signs of Leo, Virgo, Libra, Scorpio, Sag, Capricorn, Aquarius, and maybe even Pisces, depending on how we live, how long we live. So this is going to mean 3 things. It means 3 things, and it's things we've been going through and continue to go through. Where Pluto is placed natally will be constantly transformed because of all these different ingresses. What house does Pluto rule in your horoscope? I use the Koch system. I use it because I find it works beautifully for the transits, but you use whatever you want. I'm not even going to get into that. So the house or houses that Pluto rules in your chart are always going to be going through a transformative cycle every time Pluto changes signs. Also, since Pluto has to do with not only transformation, Pluto is the planet of choice, where we have to choose. Are we going to go this road, or are we going to go that road? Large choices are made during these periods of time. You've come to a fork in the road. You have to decide to transform. And that's going to require some sort of payment or sacrifice, as well as courage, which is, remember, in the old days, before they saw Pluto, they had Mars, right, ruling Scorpio, which requires courage. And here is a cheat sheet I used I had this designed by my artist. And this is actually for all of the ingresses of Uranus, Pluto, Neptune, and the node in Aries. But this is the Pluto ingresses. You can just see, without even reading this, how close these all are to each other, starting around 1937 when Pluto entered Leo. And when Pluto enters Pisces, it'll be 2043. So here's the Uranian age cycles, are not what we call normal, but they sure wake us up. So Uranus cycles are known for their chaotic and outrageous events when Uranus is active. One thing to remember is, and this is important because, we've got Uranus and Taurus on the nodes now. People are afraid of Uranus because it's chaotic and, oh, Uranus, my life is going to be pulled out from underneath me. But, Uranus does not act out at all. If you've been listening to the radio signals it's been sending you to do something that it keeps telling you to do, but you keep ignoring it, it's when you ignore it and you've ignored it enough that it does an earthquake in your life, or it blows things up in your life, because you've been so afraid with Saturn to make a change. Because once you listen and you make a change without being afraid, magic can happen. And this is when You know, this is what we start to see, especially when Uranus at the first square to its natal position. It's very raw. It's around 21 to 22 years of age when you're having the Saturn last quarter square. This is a great time. I was saying it earlier, you know, especially with Jupiter at 24 years of age. This is the experimental phase of Uranus square. It's good. At that point, Saturn and Uranus are at odds with each other now, and the pressure is on. You don't want to follow the rules. That's Saturn, but you know, rules will breed rebels. A lot of innovative ideas will show up during this period of time too, because as long as you have the structure of Saturn built in to, if you're looking at a new way of doing things, make sure you have done the work first. And so that's the first Uranus square to its natal position, which is why it's kind of good to be sort of free during this period of time so you can try a lot of different things. But around 39 to 42 years of age is when the opposition happens. And this is when I think we actually awaken to our soul's purpose. I think this is when a genie or a catalyst comes into our life to change us, to move us up, to change what we're doing. And it's a rebellious cycle. It's an innovation thinking cycle. And, you know, years ago, I thought this was so great. Catherine DeJersey was a great astrologer in Chicago. She taught me about eclipses. I just was so blown away when her predictions were so precise. But I remember when she talked about Uranus, and she always called it the big dealers. The big dealers. And I translated that to wholesale versus retail. Which is interesting because if you think about, you know, now we're all on virtual, today we're meeting, you know, and there'll be people that'll be seeing this later in the week. We can talk to one person as a client, which is great, or we can talk to a room of 100 people in 1 hour. So that's, you know, and we can, with the virtual that's happened now with all the internet stuff, we're doing a lot of big wholesale versus retail kinds of thinking, but it's a lot of innovation going on. So when Uranus opposes itself around 39 to 42 years of age, it's happening right as Neptune is coming into a square to natal Neptune. And I will tell you something that I noticed a lot. You know, when people would come in, especially in the early 80s, I remember this a lot. They were married. They were going through a patch like most marriages do. And then somebody showed up that was totally in love with, that had changed their life, and they wanted to spend the rest of their life with this person. And they're going to just throw it all out and go with this person. Well, those usually didn't last, by the way, but those people that came in were the catalyst for them to make a decision in their relationships. And I saw this a lot, you know, and I would say this very straight with people. Look, you know, this is possibly a catalyst. It's up to you what you want to do, but maybe you want to think about what you can change first before you do that, because, you know, down the road, it might not feel like the right thing to do. It also takes bravery to make a change as well. So, you know, this is always when the lightning, or when you're, you know, when you're tired of your job and you want to do something different, a lightning rod type person might show up, or an idea shows up in your life, changing your professional life. It's the ability to step out of the box, because Uranus is outside of the box of the visual field, and try something new. It often comes when you're in the right place at the right time. You know, you're talking to somebody, you've been thinking about it, you've been getting a radio wave, you want to learn about, I don't know, French cuisine. And you've been thinking about it, you've been reading about it, and then you run into somebody who knows somebody who teaches those classes. That is not an accident. That is a Uranian moment. And this problem with people is we ignore those signposts. And it's important not to ignore the signposts and follow through. I had a course years ago, used to say, if you get an idea, act on it within 48 hours, find out something about it in 48 hours. And I've stuck to that all these years. It's a good tool. Key thing here is you want to set up your life in a Uranus opposition as best as you can. So because you're going to want more freedom as Neptune begins to activate and square itself. So maybe not see as many clients every week, or maybe part-time work, or, you know, we're seeing that a lot with a lot of the people between 39 and 42. It's the great resignation. They discovered that they can work online or they can work fewer hours and do another job. That's happening in our society right now, especially with Uranus traveling on the North Node. Then we have the Dionysian, which is the Neptune cycle. Dionysus and Neptune comes out of Zeus. Jupiter are one and the same. Noted for his ability to move people out of their current existence into alternate realities, often with the use of drugs, alcohol, or physical movements such as intense dancing. When Neptune squares Neptune and it activates parts of the chart, it creates an out-of-body experience that is, and this is very important, that is temporary. It is not permanent. It is temporary and often the passageway to a larger change. The Neptune square Neptune, which happens at 42, or Neptune opposition, which a lot of people are having now, are the lost at sea Neptune cycles. The remedy for these Neptune cycles is to honor the god Dionysus that are ruled by Neptune. I'm not saying do drugs and alcohol, although a lot of people do that, but maybe try meditation, try dance, try taking an art class, try working on your sleep state, because Neptune wants more time for you to sleep so that it can process more things in the unconscious. Maybe go back to music, learn how to play an instrument, go by the water, go fishing, go boating, go walk by the water. This is how you honor the god Neptune or Dionysus, or study wine. It's another thing. The Dionysus was the god of the wine. Study something that's Neptune related. Neptune cycles are a longing to be something greater than the self, something outside, to be inspired. At about 21 years of age, transit Neptune is in an opening semi-square, a 45-degree angle relationship to the natal Neptune. And this is also one of the lost cycles of Saturn. So what does that mean? It means that, you're legal age now. In a lot of states, you're legal age at 18, but at 21, a lot of states allow you to drink. You can vote in a lot of states. But this is also when you're kind of considered sort of an adult and you need to be responsible. But there's a lot of drinking that goes on around 21, 22, 23 years of age. This is one of the confusing but also inspiring cycles where maybe you were in school to study one thing and now you're not so sure you want to do that anymore. And you're beating yourself up because you should have spent your money better in education. Not the time to beat yourself up. It's the time to try other things while you're working, maybe a class at night. When you're 42 years of age, Saturn transit Neptune performs its first quarter square to your natal position. It's the first time. And this is the call to ecstasy. And it's what I call the Shirley Valentine year. If anybody has never seen it, you should see it. It was also a stage play because I do a lot of work with movies and mythology and astrology. And I'm going to tell you more about Shirley in a moment. But then we have at 82 to 83 years of age, Neptune opposes natal Neptune. Now, that didn't happen before because people weren't living as long, okay? But now from Neptune opposes natal Neptune. Where's Neptune in your natal chart? What house does Neptune rule? There's something that you need to let go of in those areas of your life and maybe get back to some sort of spiritual practice if you've separated from it or doing a little bit more praying or meditating or resting. People get very tired at this age because at the same time, transiting Saturn is also in the last quarter square to natal Saturn. I do think that a lot of undiagnosed illnesses show up during this time, but they're having a hard time figuring out what's wrong with the physical body. And I think that has a lot to do with Neptune. I'm not a doctor, but I've seen that a lot with people that I know that are between about 81 and 84 years of age that keep going back and forth to the doctors and they can't figure it out, And sometimes it's a crisis of the spirit, which is why they can't figure it out with the body. And it's never too late to get back to a spiritual practice, and this is a great time to do it. So let's talk about Shirley Valentine. If you ever get a chance to see this, it's hysterical. And what it is, and this is actually how I started getting interested in film and archetypes and age cycles. Shirley is a 42-year-old, because they say in the film she's 42. She's a 42-year-old English housewife whose Saturn husband, who's on the right, he's a good man, but he works 7 days a week, On Mondays, he has to have a certain food. On Tuesdays, he has to have a certain dinner. He's very rigid about his life. Shirley talks to her wall, Saturn. You know, and on her wall behind this conversation, you see a poster for Greece. And she keeps saying she has a dream that she wants to go to Greece and sit by the river, Neptune, drink wine, Neptune, and have a vacation. And her husband doesn't want to go. So one day at 42 years of age, Shirley leaves a note on the Greek poster, gone to Greece, see you. And that's during her Neptune square Neptune. And of course, she goes to Greece and she goes through this whole Dionysian Neptunian transition. But I won't tell you the end of the story because it's worth watching if you want to get a real handle on a Neptune square Neptune or Neptune cycle. That's the movie to see. Okay, what about Chiron? Chiron cycles take 52 years to return when all the parts finally come together. It also happens at 104 years of age. So Joyce Mason was a very good friend of mine. Years ago, we used to see each other. We haven't seen each other in a long time, but she specialized in Chiron. She once told me, and this is kind of a paraphrase of what she said, when you have your Chiron return, all those parts of yourself that were split up until the Chiron return suddenly come together and you see things clearly from then on beyond whatever you saw before. And then I also put her URL for her website. My added thoughts to this, because I learned a lot when she told me that, is wherever Chiron is placed in your chart natally is where there will always be a split or a conflict between your intuitive and your intellectual self, where you know you should do one thing, but then the other part of you is saying you should do this, and you keep tripping yourself on your own feet. But then when you hit 52, you keep the split at bay, and suddenly all those things come together, and now you can see things very clearly on where you kept tripping things up in that area of your life. So where Chiron is at birth is where there's a learning wound for your life, and where you had a learning wound was experienced, and you're being asked to, when you have the Chiron return and all the aspects to Chiron, to work on that wound, perhaps in the first quarter square, and when you come to terms with it as it moves into the last quarter square to its natal position. Chiron returns create experts in the areas in which they were wounded, because I think Chiron is a hybrid energy, because it's right between Saturn and Uranus in the sky. So I think it's very much a hybrid energy, much like Chiron, the teacher, was a hybrid. He was a god and he was immortal. He was a horse and he was a man. Now, Zane Stein, I wish Zane would make a little clear. Zane had given me permission to use this, so I'm using it, because since Chiron is, you know, what Joyce also used to say. What? Yeah. What? Hello? Okay. What Joyce also used to say about Chiron is it's like Pluto, but it leads you more gently, which I thought was an interesting quote also. So because it's elliptical like Pluto, Zane Stein put together this really fascinating graph of, you know, where was your Chiron at birth, which is across the bottom. I don't know if you can read the glyphs. And then what he did is he has the ages from 5 all the way up to, I don't know, 29, it looks like. And so if you look at this, if you remember your graph reading in school, say you were born with Chiron at early degrees of Libra, that means that somewhere, let me get my pointer here. Here's Chiron in early degrees of Libra, that somewhere around 6 to 7, you had your first Chiron square. But if you say you have Chiron in middle degrees of Sag, which is right about here, and we move it up here, and we go to the left, you had your first Chiron square at 14. And so where the wounding is the first square is, how am I going to manage this wound? What am I going to do about this wound? Because it's the first quarter square. And I think this is worth an article. I think this is worth exploring, but it's really cool to see his graph. I might one of these days redo it and give him a better copy, but he gave me this to use, and he's done a lot of work with Chiron. Okay, so I know we're running out of time, but let me go through these slides very quickly. I quickly want to talk about the solar arcs that happen at certain age cycles. And I'm going to go through these very quickly.
George, excuse me, it's plenty of time. You don't need to rush.
Okay. Really?
Yes.
Oh, thank you. Okay. I usually am pretty good about my timing, but I was a little long-winded today. Let me get a little water. I love solar arcs. I actually use them a lot more than I use secondary progressions, although I use secondary progressions. And over the years, I kind of saw some things that I didn't see until I had been past these ages. And then I saw them, and then I could tell my other clients about them. So if a solar...
George, excuse me, there's a request for you to go back one slide.
Oh, okay. Here?
Probably.
Yes, please. Thank you.
And if you look at the cheat sheet that you're going to get in the mail or wherever you're going to get it, it's not circled, but it also has these also on your cheat sheet. So from 28 to 29 years of age, all solar arc planets are semi-sextile, 30 degrees to the natal position. Same time, you're having your first Saturn return and your secondary moon is returning to its position. At 44 to 45 to 46 years of age, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, all the solar arc planets are at 45 degrees from their natal positions. And of course, that depends on how fast the sun moves. It's going to be later if you're born near the summer. It's going to be earlier if you're born near the winter solstice. Oh, you know what? This is blank. I was going to fill it out, but I didn't. So this is when all the solar arc planets at 60 years of age are at 60 degrees sextile to the natal position. It's funny, I thought I filled it in. And then at 72 years of age, and you can do more research with this, is the quintile that I was talking about, the aspect of major evolutionary change, where all the solar arc planets are at 72 degrees from their natal positions. And of course, that will vary. If the person's born in the summer, it'll be much later, 2 or 3 years later. If they're born in the winter, it'll be a little earlier or on spot. So with that said, let's do an example quickly for those who don't know about solar arcs. If a solar arc moves approximately 1 degree per year, which is basically how the sun moves approximately 1 degree a day, depending on the speed, it's a little less, a little bit more, then what happens at certain ages? Around 45 years of age, everybody has their Saturn opposition Saturn. But around that same age, again, give or take a year, depending on the speed of your natal sun, all the solar arc planets have moved to a semi-square, 45-degree opening semi-square, moving into the crescent, obstacles, red tape phase. Now think about this. Not only are you having a Saturn opposition, you're having a Saturn semi-square, all the natal positions. This is a double stress period for people. It's exhausting. They feel very alone, I think, during this period of time. And they're really uncomfortable, you know? And I think as human beings, unless you're very evolved, we don't make a lot of changes unless we're really uncomfortable. And this is a real uncomfortable period in somebody's life. I wish we knew better, but we don't. So this is when we make a decision, you know, Saturn opposing Saturn, the rubber band is going to break if you don't make a change. What's in the way? What red tape are you constantly dealing with that you don't need to deal with? I mean, these are some of the issues. So it's a turning point where you decide which road you're going to take to go towards a better road for yourself. Now, oh, this is a summertime birth. I'm sorry, I was going to make that into black. This is an example of a summertime birth. They had all their solar arc planets on the, you'll see this, if you have solar fire, you can actually see this. You'll see that on August 9th of 1993, this person had all their solar arc planets in a semi-square to their natal Pluto. This was at their 47th year of age. Now, because they were born in the summer, it's a little later. It's not 45, it's 47. So in this example, 45 degrees is the semi-square. It's the crescent phase, which is overcoming obstacles. And at the same time, this person was also experiencing Saturn opposing their Saturn. In this particular example, there were millions in major bankruptcies for this particular individual. I won't say why, because I'm going to move forward to the next slide, and then I'll tell you why. Oh, I'm so sorry, these should have been dark. Winter solstice 1961. What is this? Winter solstice 1961. You know, I'm going to skip this slide. This is a slide that got into the wrong spot. Sorry about that, folks. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah, this is correct. So let's go back to this one. This is the 45-degree, August 9th of 1993. This person was 47 years of age. They had major bankruptcies. Then, this is the person. It's Donald Trump. And we could do a lot about his chart, but I've decided to do one more. Remember, we talked about the 72nd year, depending on when you're born. If it's later, if you're in the summer birth, it's going to be later, and if it's in the winter birth, it's earlier. Well, on September 13th of 2021, which was a little over a year ago, all of Mr. Trump's solar arc planets were in quintile, major evolutionary change, quintile 72 degrees. And that was September 13th of 1951. On September 15th of 1951, September 13th of, sorry, it was September 13th of 2021. On September 15th of 2021, this was a book that was in, there's a lot of books out, you know, written by Bob Woodward and Robert Costa, but there was a lot of news coming out 2 days later. Woodward and Costa wrote that Joint Chief Chairman Mark Milley was deeply shaken by the assault, was certain that Trump had gone into a serious mental decline in the aftermath of the election, with Trump now all but manic, screaming at officials and constructing his own alternate reality about endless election conspiracies. Milley worried that Trump could go rogue, the authors write. And it's a very interesting chart because during the time that we've, you know, we don't know how any of this is going to resolve out. I'm just going to say, we don't know. I have a feeling I know how, but I'm not going to say it. But during the time the craziness was going on, Neptune was in a square to the United States nodes. And so much was going on with Neptune during the entire craziness of the last 2 to 3 years. And so I wanted to share that with you because in the news just this morning, this is the Trump horoscope. And I don't like spending a lot of time on Trump, but I just thought since it was the news, we should bring it up. Today, Neptune is going direct at 22 degrees Pisces, 35 or 36 minutes. And last night, apparently Friday and today on his Truth Social network, he had several claims that he should be immediately reinstated as the president because the Constitution has a lot of fraudulent things going on with the Constitution, the Justice Department, et cetera, et cetera. And the reason I'm bringing this up is here's Neptune going direct, 22 degrees Pisces, squaring the north node sun because he's born on an eclipse, opposing his moon south node, where Venus and Mercury are right now and out of bounds, by the way, and where Mars is retrograde at 1750, just passing the square to this Neptune, which was actually part of the Jupiter-Neptune conjunction this year, which was at 23 or 24 degrees. This is all going at the same time. The Saturn is coming up finally to oppose the Mars. So, you know, I'm not going to spend much more time about this, but whenever you have on the note, when you have your north, you have your nodes, your natal lunar nodes, and you have a major planet, you know, Mercury will go through fast, Venus goes through fast, but you have a major planet like Neptune or Pluto or Saturn or Uranus, which are really slow, squaring the nodes at the bendings. This is when those planets will act out in whatever way you deem to act them out, the positive or the negative manifestation. Sidebar, which has nothing else to do with this, although he is doing this thing called Truth Social on a network, a virtual network, is that sometimes you'll also see if those slow planets are squaring the nodes, this person might be interested in a certain industry that's related to that planet. I just wanted to share this with you because the other thing about age cycles, because we're coming to the end, I'm going to give a little example of one more quick example, is that you have to look at everything going on in the chart. You just can't look at one thing. But this was a fascinating thing, and I had to put that in this morning. So I wanted to very quickly go through Georgia O'Keeffe. She was born, come on, Georgia. Georgia O'Keeffe, born 1887. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know we are running out of time now. She has a very angular chart. She was, if no one knows who she was, or she was a remarkable artist who had many transformations in her lifetime. And it's funny because she was a Scorpio rising with a lot of Scorpio, and Pluto and Neptune on the 7th house opposite. And I wanted to go through she had a life that was very, she was very successful, but it wasn't without a lot of pain and a lot of work. So I wanted to kind of go through, she had some mental illness, Georgia O'Keeffe. She had depression that she suffered with on and off throughout her lifetime, which I think is the fate of many artists. I think we go into this alternate state, it's very Dionysian, and then we come back. 12-step programs are very Neptunian, very Dionysian. You have to be, you're longing for something greater than the self, and you have to connect at some level to spirit, which is what an artist has to do to be inspired to do the work. So, but she had on and off depression throughout her life, and she had a major psychological breakdown around the age of 46, which is all that stuff we were talking about: Saturn opposition, Saturn solar arc, 45 degrees of the natal positions, and other things that were going on in her chart. And this is a painting she did at 49 years of age after this very difficult breakdown, which was kind of the beginning of her alternate painting, the flowers that we saw that were so unique and different. If you don't know who Georgia O'Keeffe is, this is her on the upper left. She lived to be 100 years of age. She did a lot of different kinds of art, including photography. So I wanted to look at this quickly. O'Keeffe was very encouraged for her art in her young years. So that was kind of cool because her teachers actually saw her gifts, especially during her first Saturn square Saturn when she was about 7 or 8 years of age. And they really supported her in her gifts. At that same time, what was happening is transiting Chiron was conjoining her Venus. You notice she has a Chiron square Venus in this chart, which is a lot of difficulty or inventing kind of a hybrid marriage, because when she married Stieglitz, who was much older than herself, she married him, but she was not always with him. I'm not going to say much about that. But at around her first nodal return at 19 years of age, she visited the Art Institute in Chicago and loved it and decided, I'm going to go to New York and be an artist. So she goes to New York. She tries New York. She actually wins a competition in New York for still life, but she has a decision. She's really hard on herself. She has a decision. I'm not going to be a good artist. So she's 21 years of age. I'm going to do what I have to do. It was the last quarter square to Saturn in her chart. It was the first quarter square of Uranus when she won the art competition, but she couldn't reckon herself to that traditional art world because it wasn't for her. So she just decided to teach commercial art. Now, what was happening during this time, she met Stieglitz in an art gallery around the 21st year of age as well. And as Uranus there's that catalyst that comes in. And they started talking and she started posing for him. And then they kind of lost touch for a while. And then at 29 years of age, when she had her Saturn return, he placed some of the charcoals that he had gotten in his gallery. Saturn return, she'd been working with charcoals. And then around 30 years of age, right after the Saturn return, she discovered New Mexico and she fell in love with the countryside. And she also had started a relationship with Stieglitz in New York, but she loved New Mexico. And at 31 years of age, Stieglitz asked her to return to New York, where she rented a room from his niece. And later that year, he left his wife. They moved in together. It was all during this post-Saturn return. And but it took 6 years for Stieglitz to get a divorce, and then they were married. So during this time, Stieglitz became her genie, her magical genie. I mean, he wasn't very easy to deal with, but he He put all her stuff up. He put her paintings around her 36th year. They started to take off. Her nodal return, her Jupiter return, O'Keeffe's paintings increased in popularity during that time. And then right as she was approaching her Neptune square Neptune, around 42, 41 years of age, she began an affair with Dorothy Norman. She had gotten this huge project, you know, that she was supposed to do with Radio City, but she lost the deal. They canceled. And then she went into heavy duty depression, Neptune square Neptune. It was suggested to her that to get herself some relief, she moves to Santa Fe, New Mexico, a little bit more permanently. And that's when she started her desert work. But, you know, she was working mid 40s a lot. She became ill. She had gone to Bermuda. You know, she was all over the place. She had gone to Bermuda to get better after this terrible Neptune was hitting her natal Mars. By Neptune was squaring her Neptune, Saturn was opposing. Bad stuff was happening with the chart. And after the sanitarium, she moves to Lake George, where Stieglitz had a house, and she started painting again. So by the time she got through all that midlife stuff, she was 49 years of age, pre-Chiron return. At 50 to 52, her work started to become very well known, many gallery showings all over the world, and also museums began to show her paintings. At age 73, transit Pluto was squaring her natal Pluto. And this is right before she started to have some problems with her eyes. And this is also when all the solar arc planets were at a 72-degree distance to their natal positions. Major evolutionary changes happened. And then we can scroll down a little bit here. At 59 to 60 years of age, she met him. She started being with him on a Saturn return. He died on a Saturn return. Stieglitz died. She had Saturn conjunct the North Node. At 80, somewhere around this time, right about the Uranus return, it started actually happening a little earlier. She started to lose her central vision, but she kept her peripheral vision. And she kept working during this Uranus return with being unassisted. She was also having a 7th Jupiter return. But then she couldn't do it anymore. And right as the Uranus return was finishing at 86 years of age, she met John Juan Hamilton, who became an assistant to her, a very close friend, and her representative, assisting her in completion of several projects because she kept working. And then in her 3rd Saturn return, she won the Medal of Freedom from, I think it was President Ford, at her 90th year. And but after that, she really kind of stopped painting, and she died at the age of 99. She left a $65 million estate to Hamilton, and then the family contested the will. And in 1988, which I thought was fascinating, on the Saturn-Uranus conjunction at 29 Sag, they settled the estate case, but that case changed a lot of the estate laws in the United States. So I wanted to show you this very quickly, and then we're going to stop. This is something, if you have a lot of time, nothing else to do. It's my bonus slide. I use this. It's called Difference Listing, which is under Reports at the very bottom in Solar Fire. You can also get it in Sirius under a different name. I think it's called Distance Listing in Sirius. So what this is, it's a 90-degree modulus, which I use for solar arcs. And I wanted to show you just a couple of things here. And this is not really age cycles, but it's another thing to incorporate into your practice. You'll see here at her 29th year of life, 29 degrees is 29 years of life, Venus and Saturn were in a hard aspect to each other. And this is when she met Stieglitz. And then over here at 59 or 60 years of age, he dies. And there's the Saturn-Venus again, which I found absolutely fascinating, okay? The genie in the bottle, Stieglitz shows up, the old man in the bottle shows up at the 21st year. Uranus is to Saturn at a 90-degree angle, woke her up. She's also waking up about her work. She wants to do something that's out of the box. And then we go over here when she's having all those oppositions, Saturn oppositions, solar arcs 45 degrees to natal chart. And here's 90 hard aspects, Chiron, Jupiter, and Neptune, Uranus. She has a nervous breakdown. She loses her mind, basically. You know, Neptune is Dionysus, where he gets people to lose their mind so that they can get their mind back, if you will. And then over here at the 84th year, she meets Juan Hamilton, Mercury Sun, helps her with her work, Jupiter, Saturn. And here's Pluto midheaven. She was very well known. She was working as much as she could well into her 80s. And of course, she died at 99 years of age. But these are really fascinating to look at because it will also help you if you're doing an age cycle check on their solar arcs. If you use this, it'll get you faster to the age and the degree. But if it's too complicated, don't worry about it. If it's not complicated, use it and enjoy it. So with that said, I just want to say any sort of delineation is a balancing act. It's always want to look at a lot of things. I use the 2 out of 3 rule or the 3 out of 5 rule if I'm going to say to a client, I think this might be happening, because whatever systems we use, we can't just use one. We have to use solar arcs, transits, secondary progressions. We have to look at different techniques and integrate them into our own unique delineation. Then we have to cross-pollinate, which I do between systems, between Vedic, between classical. I do that. There's no rules, folks. You can incorporate these things. This allows you to target approximate dates, even though prediction is not a popular word these days. You can find possible timelines. Okay, so I'm finished, but I'm going to just mention this. If you want to learn more about any kind of astrological topic, today's proceeds are going to go to the AlexandriaIBase.org project, which I've been chair of for 9 years. We've been a legal entity, a nonprofit 501c3 educational foundation for almost 8 years now. And it's a subject-driven database for astrology researchers. It's free at this juncture. Our output, unfortunately, is $4,200 a month because we have paid staff putting together the most unique subject-driven, topic-driven, author-driven, publisher-driven database. So even in your own library, or if you're looking for a subject in a book, whatever we have listed there, you put it in the search engine, and it'll give you all the books, articles, or journals that we have, where they are, where you can find them. Maybe there's internet access at Internet Archives, where you can borrow a book online, so you can study even in your own library. Because in my own library, I have a big library. Sometimes I forget where something was, and I just punch it in there, and I go, oh, it was in that book. So we need help. We have 5 people paid on staff. We've been doing this 9 years, the number 9. We've got about 14 months of funding left. And so if you can use this and tell your friends and tell your organizations and your groups, it's a service to our astrological community, because God knows what's going to happen to all the literature going forward. And that's all I'm going to say. My own website is starcycles.com, where you can get a list of events, free forecasts, the cheat sheet. This is what the Alexandria iBase looks like. We have a match program going on through the end of this month. Whatever you give, it will be matched. And thank you if you can do that. And then this is my stuff. A lot of stuff, lots of stuff. And I'm done. So I'm going to stop my share. Thank you, everybody, for being here today. Any questions? I know it was a lot of material. Oh, good, you put the stuff in there. And I'm going to put in my email if you want to write to me. I'm going to put that in right now. I hope I spelled it right. These are so small. Yeah. I can't hear anybody, so you can unmute yourselves.
Okay. Well, George, that was great. Lisa had put in your email address earlier, and so there's one thing that Janet Booth had put in earlier, where you're talking about progressed moon phases. She said, I always run progressed moon phases for 99 years and look for eclipse, new and full moons in their proportions.
Yeah, they're important. Oh, yeah, it's very, very important. You want to talk, Janet?
I have a question/comment. First of all, I love how you coordinated all the different things that are happening at the different ages. And I'm glad that you pointed out that, for instance, in solar arc happens differently if you're born winter versus summer. And even I want to add to that, with a very erratic orbit like Chiron,
Oh.
you're going to have some people have Chiron return, like I had it at 50. So it's not
That's true.
always,
Thank you.
sometimes the ages you've pegged, they're close, but there
Yeah.
could be variances. And that's just my little Virgo rising thing to say. But
So
yeah.
I appreciate that because you're correct. Chiron is very elliptical. I'm just so used to doing 52 on that one because I don't use it as much, but you're right. I mean,
And when you think about Zane's graph, and yes, depending on where in Chiron's orbit, even zodiacally, you're born, you're going to have that variance in the age that you have the different phase aspects. So
yes.
fascinating. And I love Jim Valier's work. I'm so glad you brought that up. I wish he had continued doing his cycles calendar because that was a great product.
He was a remarkable thinker.
Mhm.
He was one of those people. I met a lot of those in the early 80s. Man, they were wizards, they really, and they had come from a different world. But Jim Valier, I remember he said that, and it was like my eyes open and go, oh my God. And then I was working with a company, a family partnership this year. And I saw that because I'm teaching 2 classes for China this next year, for 2 schools in China, business astrology. And I was using this example last year, and I, how you do play around, go, wait a minute, their eclipses happened way before they became I wonder where, and sure enough, on the date, the phone call came and said from the company that it's a long involved story saying, well, we know we have a 50-year lease, but we're exercising a 25-year option on a date. And I thought to myself, well, what's that going to be about? Well, there it was, so those are very important. Those, the secondary moon following Saturn, that's really, and is it in Solar Fire? You can do there's one program that does the 99 years, but I'm not sure.
Solar Fire. I don't know if they had the program there or if I set it up. I don't know. But I have a question too, kind of about orbs, not just by degree, but by time. So for instance, you gave the example of Trump and the Millie being worried about him going rogue. And the date that you had in his solar arcs was the September in 2021. But of course, he had been out of office already by then for 8-9 months.
Right.
But the fall before, like in November and December of 2020, he was within a 1 degree, 1 year orb of that aspect. And that's what I think Millie was worried that he was, going to go rogue or something.
Right. And this came out, and that's a very good point, Janet, because I think I've seen this, and I think Stephen Arroyo talked about this in one of his books. It was a blue book, I think. Anyway, that sometimes when an aspect is finishing, when it's leaving is when you see it. Not when it's going towards it or in it. It's when it's leaving, because it's like after the full moon. Oh my God, is that what happened? And that I had the date wrong. I'm sorry, a couple of slides were a little off. I apologize. It was September 13th of 21 that book had come out where they were quoting Millie. That book came out and it was in the news as that was happening in his solar arc, even though it had happened the year before. Yeah. I mean, I think those are fascinating to me. Thank you. You're so smart. Thank you.
Georgia.
Hi, Yvonne. Hi, Yvonne. I didn't see you. Thanks.
I know, it's great to see you. I've been waiting for this.
So I got another question. Mary, did you have a question? Anybody raising a hand here in real life? No? Okay. Oh, we're
There's
done.
lots of questions, but they're usually too long, right?
No, there's no questions.
Well, I don't have one figured out yet, but as you're talking, you see what you're reminded of. Like, for instance, in my case, my parents died like 29 years apart at 11 degrees of a Scorpio squaring my Pluto, which I thought is a kind of an amazing thing to happen twice.
Right on the same schedule with Pluto, especially,
Yeah.
And it might be that you have a very strong Pluto in your chart, which would make it even more so.
Right.
Because I think if you have when you have Pluto transits and you have a lot of Pluto, you got to step up a little bit, have the guts, to deal with it, because it's hard. I think it's very hard for Plutonian people to deal with those shadow things, hard for all of us.
So
Anyway.
Louise
Huh?
raised her hand. Louise, can you unmute yourself?
I think I did. Hi. Please bear with me. I'm just a student, and I also have a cold. So I'm just really learning a lot of things for the first time today. And I guess my question right now is about the Saturn return. And is there anything going on between, well, let me ask it this way. How long would you feel the effect of a Saturn return between that and the first quarter?
I think it's a longer, I think this is an opinion, okay?
Okay.
I think your Saturn return is 29 and a half years exact, but you start
Right.
feeling it around 28, 30, 31. I think it's longer at the Saturn return.
And what
It
about
just
the
feels
second
longer.
one?
The
So,
second
okay,
one, well, it depends on how you did the work in the first Saturn return.
well,
I think the second
yeah.
Saturn return, it can be really kind of great. It's a lot of responsibilities because, we're all older and family and health issues. But it seems because you have more experience that it's better. That's because you have more experience in the second Saturn return. You have absolutely no experience in the first Saturn return.
Okay.
And
So
that's part of the difference, I think.
if a person is dealing with a whole lot of illness, let's say from 60 to 63 or 64, what should I look at besides Saturn? I'm thinking Uranus in the 6th house, but is there more?
Well, I mean, that's a whole delineation thing. I don't know the person's chart because, as I said, you got to look at everything. But you look at the 6th house, the ruler of the 6th house, ruler of the 12th. Where are the eclipses moving? Are they hitting? Where's, you really have to look at a lot of different things. I can't really say on that one unless I saw the chart.
No, that makes sense. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. This was really
Thank you for
really
coming. Keep
informative.
studying.
My pleasure. Thank you.
All right, so any other questions, or we'll see if Georgia wants to wrap up? Any last minute questions, or, I mean, there've been a lot of comments in the chat saying how much they enjoyed the talk, but any last question, or?
I just want to say, I love seeing Pluto behind you and
Right?
do you have any other like punny kind of planetary cartoons on the wall there that we can't see?
No, I have Pluto because I have a family full of Scorpios. So, I mean, my son works for me for the other business, the investments, and he's got a lot of Scorpio. My daughter's a Scorpio. My mother was a Scorpio. I think my father was a Scorpio. And so I'm not. And so when I saw this about 15 years ago, I thought, I've got to have that because I think I got it when I was having a Pluto transit of something. And I thought, I've got to have that in my office just to keep myself balanced, And thank you for recognizing that it's Pluto, because some people have said to me, oh, that's goofy. No, it's Pluto. Yeah, he's pretty cool. He's pretty big too. Let's see, there he is. Yeah. I mean, I have other things. I have a lot of, I'm a Pisces, I'm covering all the bases in the office. I have gods, I have icons from the Greek church. I have, Pluto, I have animations. I figure I'm protected here, So this was fun to be with you guys. I hope I see you someday in person.
No,
Yeah,
that was
definitely
great, Georgia. So thank you so much. So any last thoughts, or we'll wrap it up? Georgia, any closing thoughts, or we'll?
No, I mean, I might mention the 17th of December, I'm speaking with Lene Van Horn and Errol Gutman, the San Francisco Astrological Society. It's 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Yes, 1 p.m. Eastern, because I'll be on the eastern side of the country at that point in my house in Florida. And Ariel's going to do a thing on Chiron. This is for the forecast for the new year. I'll do a thing on the general forecast of what I see coming up in terms of, the stuff I do. And then Lene does a forecast for the signs. And it's from 10 to 1, and we each do about an hour. And it's San Francisco Astrological Society. And they will have a recording available for people if they can't attend. And then in January and February and March, I'm teaching for a lot of different, and so go to the website for events if you're interested. There'll be listings of what I'm teaching at, where I'm teaching online, and the new cheat sheet is kind of fun. It's a nice, mine's a mess, but for those of you who have never seen it, it's a color-coded timing device for the year, and then it has forecasting in it, and $6.95 at the website. It's a pretty good deal, actually. So anyway, it was fun, and I hope you all have a great holiday season. I hope whatever holiday you celebrate, that you have a good time with it, you know. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Georgia. And I'll just say in terms of upcoming events, NCGR Boston has a lot of great speakers coming up. So just keep your eyes open for emails that will be coming. And Georgia, once again, just thank you so much. It's great to see you and a wonderful
you
talk.
too.
So
Thank you.
all right,
Thank you.
Thanks to you.
And you want to, if you have questions, just write to me. I just put my thing in there. If you have questions or comments or whatever, you can do that too. I love you all. Bye.
Hey, David, can we give a plug for Ramya Krishnamurthy is speaking this coming Thursday for the Astrological Society of Connecticut.
Good.
Her research work on the astrology of twins. And that is available for non-members if they come to myasc.org.
Good. That's good. She was great. She's
Yes.
great.
Yeah, Rami's terrific.
Okay, see you then. See you all
Okay,
soon.
bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks to all
Bye,
for
thank
attending.
you.
Bye-bye.